In today's video, we're going to be looking at the ABS GoldGrid EA. And this is by Mr. Lee here, who's also the developer of the AOT bot. Also a genuinely good guy. He sent me a few emails thanking me for making a video on his previous bot, and I've heard generally good things about his work. So here he's being very transparent with what he's doing. This is a GoldGrid bot. And GoldGrid bots can be higher risk if you are using them in a more aggressive manner. But as long as you know what you're getting into, there's definitely a time and a place for grids. And here what's quite interesting about his is he's running a few settings which make it a lot safer than many almost kind of random grids. Like if you ever traded any of like the Dark Venus or whatnot, they just seemingly buy at random with an enormous grid, whereas his is a little bit more well thought out than that. So here we can see that it is indeed just trading a grid on gold, and effectively he's recommending a few different set files based on your risk preferences. Here we can see that he's had crazy high returns on IC markets in his account, but granted he's put in a fairly modest amount of risk and then essentially grew it and took withdrawals as well to reduce his total risk, which makes a lot of sense when running this kind of strategy. Looking at the statistics here, the biggest takeaway for me is that he's only buying, and that's really smart because one of the big things is I usually would not run a grid on gold, because gold is exceptionally volatile. And usually if you try and run a grid on something that's volatile, like grid or Bitcoin, it can be a pretty nasty surprise because you can have these big moves. But one of the things he's doing to alleviate this is because gold is such a bullish asset, it does over time tend to go up. It doesn't mean you can't have a bearish period, so you have to be careful. But because there is a more bullish bias, he's using that to kind of eventually kind of recover from his grids, which makes sense. Like I definitely would not make a short grid on gold. So this is definitely a more well thought out version of that. And we are seeing that it is very much a classic grid. We're having multiple positions closing in at the same time. So overall, it's looking exactly what he says it's doing exactly what he says it's doing. We don't have a ton of information about the exact strategy behind it, but most likely it's some sort of mean reversion based entry, or perhaps a breakout based entry with a grid distance, which is either based on fixed points, which is based on ATR, perhaps based on percentage of price. And essentially as price goes against you, he will then open additional positions with usually an increased lot size. As we can see here, there actually is no increased lot size. I guess he's doing a grid, but he's not doing a grid martingale because there's no increasing of lot size. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, that's actually a very worthwhile thing to point out. Usually with grid bots, they tend to scale the lot size. So like for instance, if we see a cluster of trades here, typically if the first one is going to be a loser, they would then increase the lot size between them so that the last trade can recover the losses of the previous ones. But here we're seeing is he's not actually scaling the lot size. He's just using a more aggressive rate of volume. And if we come to the back test here, which I ran on MT5, we can start to get a bit of a better idea how it's working. Lo and behold, there's absolutely no lot scaling, which is really quite interesting. And here, this must be with relatively, actually, I'm not so sure if I loaded that. Let me quickly go back here, and I will do my best to load that. Here we go, high risk. I think because the one I saw previously that looks to be more of the default settings, and now I just loaded the high risk settings. Here we go, this makes more sense. Okay, that did not look nearly as pretty. So I just ran it here, and yet, lo and behold, it's gold on the H1. Huh. I hope I loaded the right one. Okay, so I checked and I did indeed load the right one. I guess it's just he's using an overly aggressive lot size here. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, or I'm not using enough. My deposit is too small at the beginning, but it is a good, like clearly from the first one, the default settings, it appears that there is a good strategy behind it. I think it's just with this particular set file, it looks a little bit nasty, but it does show the presence of an equity stop loss. Let me just go back to our default just to kind of have something better to work with. But what is showing me in the high risk set file is there's probably an equity stop loss here, where essentially he has some sort of risk parameters, which is getting him out of the trade if needed. So here's a much prettier looking one. and we can see that our drawdown is always super low, so we're not actually hitting the equity stop loss. Risk management, account protection, there we go. So max drawdown, there is an equity stop loss here too. So yes, like lo and behold, this does look like a grid on gold. Let's go and zoom in so we can see the exact entry. It looks like actually more of a breakout style system. Yeah, I think he's looking for a pullback, because that wouldn't be a breakout. That's like a more of a mean reversion premise, but perhaps with the underlying trend. So he's in an uptrend and he's looking for a pullback and then to buy. However, if price goes against him, he then opens additional positions, which makes sense. So here, pullback, goes long, enters, pullback, or maybe a little bit of a pullback, goes long. Probably is being driven off of some sort of indicator. Entry signal, enable core 1, enable core 2. So probably two different ways of looking at it. At the same time, he also has good risk management parameters, like the ability to toggle the risk quite well, as well as an equity stop loss. I'm not seeing any indicators per se, but most likely he's hard-coded something. He doesn't want to give away the exact information, which is totally fair. But overall, it looks to be exactly what he says it's doing. So this guy knows what he's doing. Most likely it's quite a good grid bot on gold. The results so far have been quite solid, and we have been seeing a pretty good signal. But one thing to note is that anytime you run this kind of system, you just have to know what you're getting into, right? Like if you use a grid, make sure that you're using more modest amounts of risk. We can see like with the Waka Waka, for instance, it's been on the market forever. It's probably one of the most widely used trading robots. And people who use the Waka Waka with low risk have had some pretty good longevity in the space, whereas those who use it with super high risk almost always blow their accounts. So here he's done some good things. He's only going long. He is managing risk to an equity stop loss. He's also at the same time seems to have a real strategy, which is based more on pullbacks and using a grid as well. And there's perhaps even some additional filters like time-based filters and a few different strategies behind it. So it looks like a really solid strategy, just inherently a riskier one, so you need to be a bit careful. So guys, hope you enjoyed this video. If you do buy this bot, let me know how it goes for you, and I will see you in the next one.